Hi, everybody. I am totally going live. Here I am, and I'm here to answer all of your questions. I'm here. I have not lied to you at all. So I'm here to talk about the French Revolution. What kind of questions you guys have? So I know that you wanted to go over probably some terms, and I just saw one mistake in the quick chat. Somebody said that Bastille Day was July 14th, 1792, 1789. So just to remind you, 789 because it was Hungary. So that's an important one to remember. Other dates you probably want to remember are day one, year one of the French Republic is September 22nd, 1792. And then the coup d'etat of Napoleon, the coup d'etat of 18th Brumaire, is November 9th, 1799. So the first question I see is, what is meant by a Parisian base for the Montagnards? And okay, so just look at my map in the back. So this is Paris, right? And France is this whole big country. Paris was the biggest city in France, and it was pretty different from the rest of France. France as a whole was much more rural, whereas in Paris, you're much more likely to be like an artisan or something else. It's not like there's farming in the middle of Paris. And so Paris also tended to be much more radical than the countryside. So most of the support for the Montagnards comes from that more radical Parisian base. So it says, leftist Jacobins that had a Parisian base made up of many sans-culottes, happily extreme, wanted a more centralized government, hated Girondins. Yes. The only other thing I would add to that definition of Montagnards is that they voted to execute the king, whereas the Girondins generally wanted to exile the king. All right. What other questions do you have? Oh, I see Michael is on here. Michael, by the way, I looked up, or I asked on Twitter actually, about the translation of the Nakaz. Remind me tomorrow and I'll tell you what the Russian historian said. Okay, I don't see any other questions in there. So, okay, so the three phases, Reese, I'm just seeing that you asked a question. The three phases are the moderate phase, also sometimes called the Bourgeois Phase, because the bourgeoisie was kind of the more moderate group. And that goes from 1789 until the execution of the king in 1793. Let's say 1789 to the day of the First Republic, so 9/22/92. And then the radical phase is from 9/22/92, so the beginning of the Republic, to the execution of Robespierre in July of 1794. And then the conservative phase, sometimes also called the Thermidorian reaction, is execution of Robespierre in 1794 to the coup d'etat of Napoleon on November 9th, 1799. And then what else? On the, I was going to say, within the radical phase, just remember that there's that 1 year Girondin rule when they first create the Republic, and then the terror starts the following year in 1793. So let me just see here. What other questions do we have? Tell me if I miss anything, by the way, because this chat goes kind of fast. Okay, so Eric asked, Abby CA wrote, what is the third estate? He did not write the Declaration of the Rights of Man. The Declaration of the Rights of Man was created by the National Assembly. Edmund Burke, I think that, I can't tell who that is. Edmund Burke wrote Reflections on the Revolution in France. He was the British conservative critique of the French Revolution, who largely talked about how France needed to look back at its history for ideas, and also said that basically they were moving too fast. For Danton, I would know that he was one of the members of the Montagnard, that he was the Minister of Justice in the National Convention. So he's kind of in charge of the revolutionary tribunals early on, but eventually he wants to slow down the revolution and stop persecuting Girondins. And so he then becomes a victim of the terror himself, and Robespierre pushes for his execution, in part because I think Robespierre thought Danton was kind of challenging him. Danton was really popular and Robespierre was not. I kind of get the sense that Danton was like kind of fun, and Robespierre was a little intense and not fun. Let's see. Genoa, difference between the Brunswick Manifesto and the First Coalition. Okay, so the Brunswick Manifesto was put out by the Duke of Brunswick, which is in Prussia. And basically it said, if the king and queen are harmed, Paris will be leveled. When the king then tries to, is put under house arrest, and they find evidence that he's connected to the publication of the Brunswick Manifesto, they then declare him a traitor, and the French Republic is created. The first coalition, a coalition just means like kind of an alliance. So the first coalition is Austria, Prussia, and then later other countries. And that's the first alliance of countries that will fight against the French in the Revolutionary Wars. Okay, Monazou is the French historian you guys read about with the revolutionary festivals, and we discussed these in class. She talks about revolutionary festivals being used by the revolutionary government to, remember, the de-Christianization program had forbid the public celebration or expression of religion. And so the French Revolutionary festivals were a way to give something else to celebrate. Monazou talks about it as like a way for them to kind of let off steam. The National Convention was the government during the Radical Phase. Okay, hold on. I just lost that question because it kind of scrolled down really fast. Shoot. I've lost it here. Where is it? Oh, so the national. So remember that the Constitution of 1791 set up a three branches of government. The executive was the king. The National Convention was the legislative branch, and then they had a judicial branch. Well, they killed the king, so basically you get a all-powerful legislative branch, and that's the National Convention. It was a one-house legislature. The National Convention is the legislature during the Republic. So yes, it was created by the Constitution of 1791. The National Assembly was, think of it like a constituent assembly, like in the US. They were came out of the Estates General and promised to write the Constitution at the tennis court oaths and all of that. And then I just did Edmund Burke, so you can go back and look at that. Okay, Council of Elders. So this goes way forward to 1795. So the terror is over. They've created the Directory. The Directory has 3 branches of government. The executive branch has the 5 directors, who are an oligarchy because they're trying to avoid having too much power in the hands of one person. So they have this 5 oligarch executive branch. And then the legislative branch is a 2-house legislature, trying to avoid what had happened with the National Convention being overly powerful. So they have the Council of Elders, which is like comparable to the American Senate. And then the Council of 500. The Council of Elders, you were supposed to be kind of older and wiser. Council of 500 initiated legislation. The Council of Elders approved it. And that's the same with the American House and Senate. The House initiates legislation, the Senate approves it. Okay, so Lynn Hunt was the author of, hey, I have one of her textbooks right here. Look at this. She's an American historian who wrote a lot about the French Revolution. She talked about the blurring of public and private life in the long article that you guys read from the History of Private Life, which I have volume 5 right here. Look at this. I'm just whipping books all over. Although the one you guys read was from volume 4. So she talks a lot about how the state was using kind of interjecting itself in private life so that the private became very public. We read about fashion, divorce, even the Marquis de Sade, and sort of rules and expectations about sex, language, the whole tu versus vous thing. A lot of that detail is just stuff that you could use in your essay on Thursday. For the test tomorrow, I would just know about that sort of blurring of public and private life. Okay, and then revolutionary tribunals, yeah, are those show trials put on by Robespierre. And Lynn Hunt did talk about divorce. So under the in the Republic, there were, I think, 10 reasons that people could give for divorce. And then Napoleon reduced that down to 3. Olympe de Gouges doesn't talk about divorce. Olympe de Gouges is the author of the Declaration of the Rights of Women. So that's from 1790. And every once in a while, this chat just flies up really quick. Okay. The Tuileries Palace is just the palace in Paris. They didn't flee there. They were, so after, well, they sort of fled there. So after the March of the Women, they moved to just another palace. It was just another royal property in Paris, the Tuileries, which is where the Louvre is now. It's in that former palace. And then eventually they're put under house arrest there. And then the storming of the Tuileries is where they find evidence that the king had published, or not published, but that the king had been involved in the creation of the Brunswick Manifesto. And the Brunswick Manifesto, I mean, the big thing there is you need to understand it's a threat, right? Okay, Montagnards versus the Girondins. So this comes, the Montagnards is just sort of a description of where they sat. You know, they sat in these, like, I don't know, bleachers. That's not the right word, but they sat in these leveled tiered seatings in the Estates General, and the mountain sat like up high. So they call them the mountain. Very creative. Montagnard is French for mountain. If you want to just call them the mountain, that's fine. So the Montagnards were more Parisian, more radical, wanted to kill the king, wanted a stronger national government. The Girondins were more in the countryside, more conservative, wanted to exile the king, and wanted stronger, like, provincial governments. I'm glad, Kiki, that you'll be replaying this. That's good. And actually, I'm hoping that you can keep this, like, it'll be up here, right? So you can use it next year when you study for IIB exams too. Do not have an all-nighter. You should sleep, because then you will be able to think better. Ancien Regime is just the word for, like, the regime before France. At the storming of the Tuileries, I think I touched on that, but just to be clear, it's where they found evidence that the king had supported the publication of the Brunswick Manifesto and had, like, collaborated with the Prussians and the Austrians. And so then that means that that's how they knew that he was, that's why they declared him a traitor. Yes, the Reign of Terror ended with the execution of Robespierre. Wait. Okay, so I just answered about the Tuileries. The Montagnards wanted to kill, yes, the king. And And yes, I'm going to save this on YouTube. The Girondins were killed off basically for not being revolutionary enough. There was a lot of concern about protecting the revolution. And so the Montagnard targets Girondins because they're, in part because they voted that they wanted to exile the king. They just think that they're not supportive enough. And I think just sort of general political disputes. I mean, unfortunately, it hasn't come to this, but I could like see Democrats and Republicans at various points, right? Like wanting to kill each other. Except in the revolution, you know, they only did that. They went ahead and did that. Yeah. Okay, the August decrees. So the August decrees weren't necessarily about protecting private property, but that was kind of the underlying goal. So they made everyone equal under the law. They made everyone equal for the same office, but they didn't make everyone equal. They abolished feudalism, which is really important, but they didn't abolish feudal dues. So that meant that even though politically you were allowed to move around and weren't tied to the land, you still had to pay money. And that meant that realistically you still were kind of connected. Okay, so the March of the Women begins the October Days. So it starts with that riot in Paris. And the March of the Women, the October Days is then kind of general, what do you call, like riots and ongoing chaos in the city, in Paris. I don't have auto scroll on, but I don't have to turn it off. Somebody will have to show me that some other time. I don't know that I would say that October Days represented France's power to work together. I think October Days is like just France going a little bit crazy. Like there's a lot of riots in Paris. I think I answered the question about the Girondins being killed. Okay, so the Vendée revolt happens in the Vendée region of France, which is kind of down right here. And the Vendée revolt started because of, there's basically two things that they were revolting against. And sometimes people call it like a counter-revolutionary moment, but I think it's more an anti-revolutionary moment. And Darton talks about this. That it wasn't so much that they were like so in love with the king that they wanted him back. It was that the revolution was just too much. They wanted to kind of like slow it down. So the big things that they were protesting was the de-Christianization program, which is a really big deal in the countryside, right? Because it's much more conservative, much more religious. And then also the draft, because the draft is really disruptive, right? If they're forcing people into military service, which was a really new idea in Europe, by the way. I'm not sure I emphasized in class like that was such a new thing. Then they're protesting that forced service in the army. Yes, royalists just wanted to reestablish the king, which is, fortunately, that term I think is pretty self-explanatory. Reign of Terror, Robespierre. Oh, okay. Great Fear is just after the storming of the Bastille. It's like late July, early August, 1789. There were rumors that basically the rich people, the manor owners in France, were going to pillage the countryside and steal all of the grain. And so kind of to prevent that, the peasants preemptively attacked the manor houses. The sans-culottes are, so they're the working class in Paris. Remember, they didn't have culottes, the fancy pants. They had full pants. So they are without short pants. regular pants because they're working class, right? So that's kind of how I have to think of that, because sans-culotte to me is always a confusing term. The sans-culotte didn't particularly have their own party. They tended to be more radical and a lot of times supported the Montagnards. The person who was really responsible for supporting their ideas was Marat, the journalist who was killed in his bathtub. Great Fear. Okay, and then the coup d'etat is just a coup d'etat, just means overthrow of the state. And that's when Napoleon overthrew the state, November 9th, 1799. For now, that's all you need to know about that. We're going to go into that more when we do Napoleon starting next week. The Great Fear isn't really related to the storming of the Bastille. It's just part of that first kind of chaotic period. And then the de facto government, de facto means like in fact or in practice. So the CPS kind of becomes this de facto or like in practice, technically, it's kind of working like a dictatorship under Robespierre. I think I did the first coalition already, so I'm going to skip that one. And yes, in the storming of the Bastille, there were rumors that the king was going to overthrow the National Convention. And so they were looking for weapons in the Bastille, which was a prison in Paris, but also like a weapon storage. Any more questions? Give it a second to catch up. Let's see. Nobody's asked about like the law of General Maxim. That was the price ceiling on grain. Dates you should know would be, I mean, in my mind, the big turning points, July 14th, 1789, Bastille Day, and September 22nd, 1792, which is the day one, year one of the French Republic. And then the coup d'etat of Napoleon, November 9th, 1799. And then I think you should kind of know, like the terror is most intense between 1793 and 1794. In the political spectrum, you just need to be able to recreate that graph that that image that I put on Schoology. The law of 22 Parial. Okay, so there's two big laws that are involved in the Reign of Terror and kind of turning the revolutionary tribunals into this Reign of Terror. So the law of suspects was so broadly written that almost anyone could be declared suspect, that the you could be accused for just not seeming sufficiently revolutionary. Or more importantly, if you were somebody's enemy, they could say, well, you're not sufficiently revolutionary, therefore I accuse you, right? So that's the law of suspects. And then the law of 22 Parial. So that kind of gets these revolutionary tribunals to be this really big thing, right? Because everyone's suspect. So there's a lot more people being brought up on trial as being enemies of the revolution. And then the law of 22 Parial says, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, law of 22 Parial says that the trials would just decide between liberty or death. So it's more about the application of revolutionary tribunals. Yes, you definitely have to wear your Napoleon hats tomorrow. This is, by the way, a spare. I had two, which I actually got for my two little boys. I have 3 kids. Somebody was asking. They were like, oh, wait, she has kids? Yes, I do. CPS, I think you should know that it's the Committee of Public Safety, that it becomes the de facto government during the Reign of Terror, that its job is to protect the revolution, which they get pretty extreme about. And then that Robespierre is the head of this Committee of Public Safety. It's like a committee of the National Convention. I can give you a rundown of all the laws, but I don't have the list in front of me. So Law of General Max. I'm just going to tell you the ones that come to mind and then add to the list here if I forget one. So Law of General Maximum is the price ceiling, which then eventually led to a shortage because if you're not able to recoup your costs, you're going to stop producing bread. Law of 22 Parietal and Law of Suspects I just did. I feel like those are the only ones, so tell me if I missed one. So the Montagnards are the most radical Jacobins. So if I was going to redraw the political spectrum, this is kind of what you'll have on the test tomorrow. It'll just say like left, right, and then probably moderate in the middle. And then you'd have like the Montagnards way on the left, the plain in the middle. And then the Jacobins actually is kind of broad. It goes from way on the left, which is the radical Jacobins, to just a little bit to the right of center. And then the Girondins just to the right of that, and the Royalists to the right of them. So something like that with you guys then just filling in the party names. This is probably flip-flopped, isn't it? I don't know how to reverse that, but we'll figure it out. Okay. Today is 21 Brumaire because it was 18th Brumaire on Friday. Darton I already covered, so I'm going to have you go back and look at the video earlier on that. Oh, so the White Terror is just the revenge terror, a terror committed by conservatives against the people who had committed the Reign of Terror. Wait. Okay. Okay, Louis the 16th. I mean, I think what you should know about Louis the 16th is that he's a weak king. Like the question a few years ago was just, to what extent was Louis the 16th responsible for causing the revolution? I think you should know the things that he did. I wouldn't say he caused the tax problem, actually. I think he just failed to solve it. I think he was handed a country and government, or a government in massive debt, and he had this tax issue he couldn't deal with. So he gets a country further in debt by agreeing to help the Americans in the American Revolution. Great for Americans, maybe less great for France because it puts them further in debt, and it brings all of these soldiers to America to fight for liberty and freedom and, you know, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And they get back to France and they're like, wait, we don't have any of these things. He also locked the Third Estate out of the Estates General, which I think is an important turning point because then they signed the Tennis Court Oath on July 20th, 1789. The Estates General, by the way, is not the same as the National Assembly. Reese, I just saw you ask that question. The Estates General is the meeting that Louis called. It was something that already existed in France. You get representatives from all three estates together, and that's what he had to call in order to raise taxes. That was part of French law. The National Assembly is when the members of the Third Estate show up, actually just before the Tennis Court Oath on July 17th, I think they say, you know, we're a National Assembly, like we're the Parliament of Paris, the Parliament of France. We are your assembly. And then Louis locks them out. And then they will become kind of a constituent assembly. I think the other thing you should know about Louis is the flight to Varennes and his involvement with the Brunswick Manifesto and his execution. Yes, it's fill in the blank like last time. I thought I talked about the sans culotte. Do you need me to say more? Let me know. Robespierre was a Montagnard and a Jacobin. So he's a radical Jacobin, which are called the Montagnards. I don't really think you need to know about Pugachev's rebellion. I might mention it in the definition of Catherine the Great, but it's not like it's a term. I'm sorry you all are tired. Why are you starting studying at 8 o'clock on Monday night? This should be like a long process. Louis agreed to help the Americans in the American Revolution because he was trying to not help the British, because didn't like the British. French and the British don't get along. No, the decree of fraternity is when France says that they will help. Basically, France says in the middle of all of this chaos, they're like, oppressed people of Europe, we will help you overthrow all of your monarchs. And Austria and Prussia are like, I'm a monarch. Well, okay, the monarchs of Austria and Prussia, I'm a monarch. Please don't overthrow me. And so that's just like fuel to the fire to want to attack France. Active and passive citizen. Yeah, I mean, active citizens could vote, but I think the existence of active and passive citizens are one of the weaknesses of the Constitution of 1791, in that they were trying to restrict suffrage to kind of get rid of, like, they were afraid of mob rule, basically. Robespierre, you should just know that he's the head of the Committee of Public Safety, that he's a Montagnard, which is like radical Jacobin, that he's kind of a paranoid despot, and that his execution ends the reign of terror because he gives that speech about you all are suspect and we need one more purge, and then they jump him and stab him and put him on trial. The real basic Enlightenment terms and monarchs, yeah, you should know. Like, you're not gonna have to know a lot of specifics about differences between the enlightened monarchs, but I think that you should know, like, Joseph II is the most enlightened, that he's really trying to reform Austria, that Catherine the Great is somewhat enlightened. She's got this legal code, the Nakaz, that she puts in place, but then kind of backs up some of her enlightenment when she wants to execute the guy who did the Pugachev rebellion. Thermidorian reaction. During Thermidor, they become kind of like this frivolous, sort of ridiculous fashions again. There's a lot of corruption. I talked about Danton. I don't think I talked about Darnton. So Robert Darnton is an American historian who talked about the possibilism in the article. I mentioned that a lot in class. The idea that the revolution was really about revolutionaries thinking a lot about what was possible. Okay. And I think that Kiki answered the tennis court oaths pretty good yet, so I'm going to leave that there. Yeah, so there's, let's see, which constitutions? So the tennis court oath isn't really a constitution. It's just them saying, you locked us out. Here we are on this tennis court oath. We're going to write a constitution. You can't stop us. That's one. And then the constitution that the National Assembly puts together is the Constitution of 1791, which creates a constitutional monarchy, active and passive citizen, and the suspensive veto is one of the big flaws. And then, yeah, the tennis court oath is June 20th, 1789. I might have misspoke there. I'm not sure. And yes, suspensive veto is like a pocket veto where he could basically sit on a law for 4 years before he approved it. Okay, and then so that's Constitution of 1791. Okay, then they kill the king, right? So then the Republic starts in 1792. Then they execute Robespierre. So then that happens in July of 1794, I believe. And then it takes them a little while to write a constitution. So the Constitution of 1795 creates the directory. So the 5-man directory, the Council of Elders, and the Council of 500. Maybe I did screw up the date. Maybe I just misspoke on the tennis court oath. I don't know. Yes, June 20th, 1789 is correct on the tennis court oath. My favorite part of the revolution, I think, is that idea of possibilism that Robert Darnton talked about, that they did a lot of crazy stuff, but they also were really trying to recreate the world in kind of interesting ways. I don't know. Yes, the 5-man directory was an oligarchy. The flaws of the Constitution. I mean, it's still a Constitution of 1795 really restricted suffrage. For the dechristianization program. And Eric, I'm sorry, I don't think I really answered that question really well. Let me think about that. The restrictions on suffrage. And still, they're not like really dealing with the issues of the economic inequality. There's food shortages that are going to lead to destabilization there. That's going to open the door to Napoleon. Kiki White Terror I did, so you might go back and watch. It's just the revenge terror against the Jacobins during the Thermidorian reaction. Kimberly, the dechristianization program starts early in the revolution with the civil constitution of the clergy, which said that members of the clergy had to swear an oath of allegiance to the state above the church, right? And if you're a member of the church, that's a problem. They also do rename Notre Dame. Does anyone remember what they called it? The new Notre Dame? I know Luis is out there like raising his hand, and nobody said. Okay, anyway, the new Notre Dame was, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. Temple of Reason. So the Thermidorian reaction is the conservative phase. It started in the month of Thermidor, so those are kind of the same. I guess the Thermidorian reaction would be like the beginning of the conservative phase, but for our purposes, you can use it kind of interchangeably. And then reactionary phase is also the same thing because it's them moving back to the right, right? Right? So conservative, reactionary, Thermidorian, all the same. I did the important dates already. Temple of Reason. Oh, wait, here we go. Yeah, like, oh, Luis, you did get it. Temple of Reason right there. Like 3 of you right at the same time. The Girondins. So the Girondins were a political party while Robespierre was in power, but Robespierre was a Montagnard and he was executing Girondins. I don't know that you need to know the order of the governments. I mean, I think for your purposes, it can be held, it's handy. I think that rap that I was telling you about was kind of handy for that. Louis, NA, CPS, then directory. I don't know that whether priests were killed for not taking the oath. I imagine some were because of the Reign of Terror. A lot of them went into hiding. To the left, to the left, to the left. Yeah, that's a song. So there's got to be something there to help you to remember the Montagnards. The Montagnards, to the left, to the left, to the left. Yes, the coup d'etat is important. All right. I think we are about running out of questions here, and I am ready to be done for the night. So if you guys don't have any more questions, I will let you sit down and study and think about it. And I have been working for like 13 hours straight. So I'm going to be about done. No, you need to be able to tailor, recreate. This is probably flip-flopped on your screen, but you need to be able to recreate this. Do not aim for a C+. Aim high. High expectations. Do you want me to create a chat on Schoology, or do you guys have some other way to do that? Yeah, you can replay this. And the centrists were called the plane. I love you all. There is no maximum number of times you can use a term on the test. You cannot, however, do blanks. All right, I will create a Schoology chat. Good night, everybody, and I will see you mañana. If you need the actual version of this, the image is on Schoology. So make sure you get some sleep because your brains work better when they are well rested. If you don't know it by now, it might be a little bit late. So good night. Have a good night, and I'll see y'all tomorrow. Bye.